Over the last 20 years, there have been a lot of Call of Duty games. 51 of them according to the Call of Duty wiki at the time that I'm making this. Though this does also include remasters, the Wii port for Modern Warfare, and the unreleased Warzone mobile. But not all of these games are connected, so I wanted to go through them and see if I can map out a sort of multiverse for the Call of Duty series. First things first, we need to start with the dimensions above and below creation. The Aether, otherwise known as Agartha, and the Dark Aether. It is between these two realms that all the other universes exist. Let's start with the originals. Call of Duties 1, 2, and 3, United Offensive, Finest Hour, Big Red One, and Roads to Victory. Between these 7 games there are over 100 campaign levels, and you would think that at least a few of them would have conflicted with each other. So I went through and listed them all out with their dates, locations, and playable characters, and to my surprise, none of them seemed to overlap. In fact, it looked like the different developers were actively trying to set their campaigns in different times of the war. And levels that do take place on the same day, such as the D-Day missions, were all in different locations. Of course, it's possible that I missed something. It was a lot to keep track of and I haven't even played most of these games. But as far as I can tell, it looks like these 7 games were meant to take place in the same timeline. The original Modern Warfare trilogy also appears to be in this timeline. I say appears to be because I could have sworn that this Captain Price was confirmed to be the grandfather of this Captain Price, but I couldn't actually find any evidence of this, although I have seen other people say this online, so I know that I'm not crazy, and I'm just gonna go ahead and include these games here. We can include the DS versions of these games too. They feature stories that revolve around the main games, and in some cases have very similar missions, but do not conflict with them, although it does get close in a couple instances. You know that level in Modern Warfare where the nuke goes off and 30,000 men were lost in the blink of an eye? Well, the DS version of that game has a level on the same day in the same place, with characters who appear later in the game, but that level does take place a few hours before the bomb goes off, so you could just say that they made it out before then. And with that, we have our first universe. Thankfully, the next few are a bit more simple. For Advanced Warfare, this game is simply set in its own universe, with no apparent connections to any other games. Ghosts may very well be in its own timeline, but I think it's more fun to consider Infinite Warfare as part of the same universe. There's a new version of the Ripper, and you can also find a model of the Odin satellite. Although the state of the world is very different between the two games, especially in the United States, but because the date of Infinite Warfare is never specified, it's possible that enough time has passed for things to have gotten better. We've also got the game Call of Duty Siege, a mobile game exclusive to Australia which takes place in the same world as Infinite Warfare. It does have characters from other games that shouldn't be there, like Soap, but it doesn't look like it's much of a narrative game anyway, so we'll just include it. Since Call of Duty Online has been discontinued, I'm not too sure it's worth putting in here, but I'll add it anyway since apparently it had a campaign. Call of Duty Mobile has its own unique story, with events that deviate pretty far from any of the other games it's based on, so it also gets its own timeline. And if we want to include the game Call of Duty Heroes, that will also get its own timeline. Next, we'll get into Black Ops. It starts with World at War, which is disconnected from the previous World War II games because of the level Downfall, which has an alternate version of the flag being planted on the Reichstag than what we see in the first Call of Duty. Then we've got the actual Black Ops games, including the DS version and Declassified, which have events from April 17th, 1961 to December 20th, 1989. Just like the World War II games, I listed out all the campaign levels and I found that none of them seem to conflict with each other. There is some strange stuff, like Alex Mason getting captured in Cuba again in the DS game, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's not connected. Black Ops Cold War also doesn't conflict with any of these games, though whether or not it's considered canon yet is questionable, so we're just going to leave it out for now. Then after that we have Strike Team, a mobile game that takes place in the year 2020, Black Ops 4, and finally Black Ops 3. As for the alternate versions of World at War, they both have various inconsistencies that set them apart from the main game, such as Roebuck being a sergeant too early, or Reznov and Dmitri not being present at the Reichstag. And that just about does it for the campaigns for these games, but there is just one last thing that I want to mention here. Call of Duty 2, 4, World at War, Modern Warfare 2, and Black Ops all have these top-down mobile spin-offs, but information about those games, especially the dates and locations, can be pretty limited, so they may be canon to their respective games, or they may not be. Either way, I've chosen not to worry about them. Now we can move on to zombies. As far as I can tell, Exo-Zombies is meant to be canon to the Advanced Warfare campaign. It takes place between the second and third missions, all of the outbreaks are contained by the end, and Jonathan Irons even alludes to Manticore's ability to regenerate cells.
And the other to life, the regeneration of human cells.
So perhaps this was all just a hiccup during the development of the DNA bomb, which would later be covered up by Atlas. Of course, Gideon is seen being grabbed by the zombies, and he can't die if this is canon to the campaign, but technically he was still alive when we last saw him, and as we all know, if there's no body, then he wasn't in that tank. Extinction's last level, which is basically the apocalypse, takes place roughly 7 months after the Odin strikes. This conflicts with the game's campaign, which is set 10 years after these same strikes, and I doubt they had this all fixed by then, so it gets its own timeline. World War II zombies apparently has some connections to the World War II campaign, and I think at one point they were actually meant to be a shared universe, but as of now they're definitely separate, but we'll get more into why later. There's the Chaos storyline from Black Ops 4, which was always meant to be its own separate thing. I know that Alistair Rhodes is mentioned in Vanguard Zombies, but I prefer to think that the same character simply exists in that timeline, and not necessarily that the whole Chaos story is canon. Infinite Warfare Zombies is a little different. All of the maps are shown to be their own little universes within a soul jar in the original dimension, but where exactly is that original dimension? It's probably meant to be its own thing, separate from any other game, but because the date is unknown and there are no world-altering events, I think it's more fun to consider it part of the same timeline as the Infinite Warfare campaign, taking place before Ghosts. But like I said, this was probably never meant to be the case. There's Dead Ops Arcade and Nightmares, which aren't connected to anything else. And finally, Black Ops Zombies, which is the basis for this whole multiverse and is made up of several of its own universes. It starts off in what we'll call the main universe, since I don't think it was ever officially named, which is all of the zombie maps from World at War and Black Ops, as well as Nuketown Zombies, Transit, Die Rise, and Buried from Black Ops 2. And one thing I want to note about this universe is that it's likely very similar to the Black Ops campaign universe, since Steris and Nova 6 exist within both. But obviously they do diverge from each other at some point, with the Earth being destroyed in one and not in the other. So my theory is that these two timelines were the same, but one was exposed to Element 115 and the other wasn't. Anyway, there's also Dimension 63, which contains the maps Origins and Shadows of Evil. There's the Alcatraz Pocket Dimension where Mob of the Dead takes place, the Empty Earth, which is shown in the comics, and Dimension 2210, which is mentioned but never actually seen. Of course, there are also many more universes, including one where apparently everyone only has one arm, but these are the important ones. And if we want to be really pedantic about it, the mobile zombie games could also be considered their own universes, at least the tutorials. The first one has Richthofen teaching you about the game before he turns into a zombie, and the second one has Dempsey doing the same before you turn into the zombie. I doubt that these were ever meant to be canon in any sort of way, but for the sake of being thorough, we'll put them in. Also, the Black Ops one has Call of the Dead with the original 4 characters instead of the celebrities, which I guess will be its own universe too. But then, after some monkey business, the chain of events was altered in the main universe, causing it to fracture. These fractures would be the Deceptio fracture for Der Eisendrache, the Prodition fracture for Zetsubo no Shima, and the Agonia fracture for Gorod Krovi. The crew then jumps up to Agartha for the map Revelations, which ends with the story starting over from the beginning and the main universe resetting to its original continuity. And this cycle would continue on and on until it was eventually broken in the map Blood of the Dead. This results in the characters going on a new, separate adventure in the main universe, which is the maps Classified, Alpha Omega, and Togder Toten. Finally, we've got the Forest, which I believe is another dimension, but it's not really clear. It's seen in the Togder Toten cutscenes, and it acts as the background for the lobbies in Black Ops 3 and 4. And so the story ends with everything being banished into the Dark Aether so that they can create a new world, free from all the evil that had corrupted each and every corner of the known and unknown universe. This marks the end of the Aether saga, and the beginning of the Dark Aether saga. Now this era of Call of Duty is much simpler than before. There's just one singular timeline and the Dark Aether beneath it. It starts off with the World War II games, World at War, Vanguard, and World War II. Now World War II may seem strange to include here, but characters from that game either appear or are mentioned in the newer games, but more importantly, clips from its campaign can be seen in this intro cinematic, which otherwise seems to be reserved for clips from the newer games. Although Advanced Warfare is included in here as well, and maybe that means that Advanced Warfare is canon to the new timeline, but to my knowledge there's no confirmation of this, and I'm not quite ready to go that far. And this is what makes its Zombies mode its own separate universe, because it does not fit into this new timeline. We've then got Black Ops, presumably the DS version and declassified, Black Ops Cold War, the levels in the 80s from Black Ops 2, and the new Modern Warfare trilogy. Warzone, with all its different maps, is also considered to be canon, and so is zombies from Vanguard, Cold War, and Modern Warfare 3. Like I mentioned before, Alistair Rhodes is mentioned in Vanguard, and posters for Willard Wyler's movies can be found in these games, which suggests that bits and pieces of those older timelines still exist in this new one. But as of right now, that is what makes up the Call of Duty Multiverse. It's a lot of different games and modes to keep track of, a lot of which I haven't even played, so it is very possible that I missed something or got some details wrong, and if I did, go ahead and let me know. But for the most part, I believe that this should be accurate.